The story begins with a quiet morning in a modest home filled with unspoken tension. The air feels heavy, carrying years of unappreciated sacrifices and silent endurance. The mother-in-law, once the backbone of her family, now moves slowly, her health deteriorating but her spirit still strong. Her wrinkled hands tremble slightly as she tries to tidy up, remembering the countless mornings she woke early to cook, clean and care for everyone in that same house. Today, however, her kindness is no longer seen as love, it's mistaken for weakness. As the scene unfolds, she hears footsteps approaching. Her son-in-law enters, his tone sharp and impatient. Without a trace of empathy, he tosses a mop at her feet and scoffs, "Stop pretending you're sick and do something useful." The words hit harder than any physical blow. For a moment, she stands frozen. Not because she's afraid, but because her heart breaks a little more. Every word reminds her that respect can vanish when gratitude fades. The same young man she once welcomed with warmth now treats her as a burden. The camera lingers on her eyes. Tired, yet full of quiet wisdom, she doesn't shout or defend herself. Instead, she takes a slow, steady breath. Inside, she feels the sting of betrayal, but also the spark of resolve. She knows something he doesn't. That true strength doesn't need to be loud. Her silence speaks volumes, and her calm presence contrasts sharply with his arrogance. As the music builds softly in the background, you can sense a storm brewing, not of anger but of purpose. This moment, seemingly small, will soon become the turning point in both their lives. Her next move won't be out of revenge, but out of dignity, a lesson he'll never forget. As the story moves forward, the scene transitions into the heart of the household, a once warm and lively home that now feels divided by invisible walls. The family dynamic has shifted over time, quietly but powerfully, leaving behind traces of love that have turned into obligation. The daughter, torn between her loyalty to her husband and her love for her mother, tries to keep the peace but often ends up staying silent when she should speak. Silence, in this home, has become a language of survival. The mother-in-law sits quietly in a corner, her frail body wrapped in a shawl that carries years of memories. She observes everything, the hurried breakfasts, the lack of eye contact, the way her son-in-law avoids her presence as though her existence inconveniences him. There was a time when this same man used to sit beside her, seeking her advice and appreciating her cooking. Back then, the house echoed with laughter, with the sounds of family dinners and shared moments. Now, the only sound that seems to linger is the tension that fills every room. At the dining table, the atmosphere is polite but cold. The daughter tries to make small talk, asking her husband about his day. He responds curtly, scrolling through his phone, barely acknowledging her mother's presence. The mother-in-law lowers her eyes, pretending not to notice, though every dismissive glance cuts deep. She has learned to find comfort in small things. The warmth of her tea, the gentle sunlight that enters through the curtains, the faint reminder of what this house once was. When she offers to help with household chores, her daughter insists she should rest, but the son-in-law mutters under his breath, "She's not sick, she's just lazy." The words hang in the air, heavy and humiliating. The daughter looks at him in disbelief, but says nothing. That silence confirms what the mother-in-law already knows, that she no longer holds a place of respect here. Later, as the family prepares for bed, she sits alone in her room, staring at an old family photo. In it, her daughter smiles brightly, her husband has his arm around her, and she stands proudly beside them. The woman who raised her child to believe in love and compassion. The irony isn't lost on her. She wonders where she went wrong, how kindness turned into invisibility, and when her home became a place where she felt unwanted. Yet, she refuses to let bitterness take root. The next morning, she watches as her daughter rushes to work and her son-in-law leaves without a word. The emptiness of the house mirrors her heart, but beneath that quiet sadness, something begins to stir. A realization that maybe it's time to teach a lesson, not out of anger, but out of love and principle. The family dynamic has revealed its cracks, and though they cannot see it yet, those cracks are about to expose the truth about gratitude, respect, and the real meaning of family. The tension in the house reaches its peak one late afternoon. The mother-in-law, exhausted from a morning of trying to help despite her aching joints and persistent cough, finally sits down to rest. The faint sound of the television hums in the background, but her mind drifts elsewhere. To the days when her daughter used to sit beside her, laughing freely, when the home was filled with joy rather than judgment. She feels the ache of age deep in her bones, a reminder that she can no longer do all the things she once did so easily. Yet, her heart still carries the same love and care for her family. The sound of footsteps breaks her thoughts. Her son-in-law storms into the room, irritation etched on his face. He glances at the untouched dishes in the sink and the broom leaning against the wall. "You've been sitting here all day," he snaps. "You're not sick. You're just pretending. You think everyone should wait on you because you're old." His words are sharp and cruel, slicing through her quiet dignity. For a moment, she's too stunned to respond. She had expected coldness, maybe impatience, but not open disrespect. She tries to speak, her voice soft and trembling. "I'm not pretending. I haven't been well." But before she can finish, he interrupts, waving his hand dismissively. "You're fine. You just want attention. You could at least make yourself useful." His tone drips with disdain, the kind that comes from a person who's forgotten compassion. The mother-in-law lowers her eyes. The pain in her chest not from illness but from heartbreak. From the hallway, her daughter witnesses the confrontation. Her face pales, torn between standing up for her mother and avoiding another argument with her husband. She opens her mouth to speak but then hesitates, the words dying before they can leave her lips. That silence, heavy and suffocating, screams louder than anything else. Her mother glances at her, eyes filled with sadness but no anger. She understands her daughter's fear, even if it hurts. As the son-in-law storms out, muttering under his breath, the old woman's trembling hands tighten around her shawl. She doesn't cry. Her eyes glisten. But her pride keeps her tears from falling. Years of sacrifice flash before her mind. Working 2 jobs to raise her child, skipping meals so her daughter could have enough, standing by her through every hardship. And now, the very person she helped raise has married a man who sees her as a burden. In that quiet moment after the storm, the mother-in-law takes a deep breath. Her heart aches, but her spirit begins to harden, not with hatred, but with resolve. She realizes that sometimes silence is mistaken for weakness, and kindness is mistaken for foolishness. But she knows something her son-in-law doesn't. Life has a way of revealing the truth, and those who mock others' pain often end up facing their own. As the evening sun filters through the window, her tired eyes seem to regain a faint spark. She whispers to herself, "Let him think what he wants. He'll understand soon enough." The day of the mop incident begins like any other, quiet, tense, and filled with unspoken resentment. The mother-in-law moves slowly around the house, her body weary but her heart still carrying the weight of love and duty. She wants to help, to feel useful, even though every step aches. The smell of breakfast lingers in the air, and her daughter rushes to leave for work, barely having time to sit with her mother. The son-in-law, however, sits comfortably at the table, scrolling through his phone, his expression indifferent and cold. As she starts to collect the dishes, her hand trembles, and a glass slips from her grasp, shattering across the kitchen floor. The sound echoes through the room, sharp and piercing. For a moment everything freezes. The mother-in-law bends slowly to clean up the pieces, murmuring apologies, but before she can reach for a broom, the son-in-law stands abruptly. His eyes burn with irritation. "Of course," he says with a mocking tone. "You break something again. Maybe if you actually helped around here, you wouldn't be such a burden." His words slice through her composure. She looks up at him, speechless, her eyes wide with disbelief. He walks past her, opens the cleaning closet, and grabs a mop. With a sarcastic smirk, he thrusts it toward her. "Here," he says coldly, "since you're not really sick, you can start earning your stay." The mop handle presses against her chest, and for a second, the world goes silent. She feels her dignity crumble, not because of the physical act, but because of the intent behind it. Utter humiliation. Her daughter, just about to leave, pauses at the doorway. She sees the scene unfold, her heart torn in two. Her mother stands frozen, the mop in her trembling hands, while her husband glares impatiently, arms crossed. The daughter's lips part, but no words come out. She feels powerless, afraid to confront him, afraid to make things worse. The mother-in-law's eyes meet her daughter's for a brief second. No anger. Just deep sadness and quiet strength. That look says everything she can't say aloud. "You don't have to defend me. I'll handle this in my own way." The old woman takes the mop slowly, her movements deliberate. She doesn't speak. Instead, she leans on it for support, straightens her back, and walks toward the mess. But there's something different in her now, a calm resolve behind her tired eyes. The son-in-law scoffs and walks away. convinced that his cruel point has been made. What he doesn't realize is that, in that moment, she has made a silent promise to herself. As she begins to mop the floor, the camera lingers on her reflection in the clean, shining surface, a symbol of her quiet strength and dignity. Though humiliated, she refuses to be broken. Every sweep of the mop is not a sign of submission but a preparation, a quiet gathering of courage for what's to come. The humiliation may have reached its peak, but what follows will be a revelation he'll never forget, a lesson born from her patience and his arrogance. That night, the house was still, wrapped in a silence that felt heavy and suffocating. The mother-in-law sat in her dimly lit room, the faint glow of a bedside lamp casting long shadows across the walls. The mop incident replayed in her mind again and again. The sharpness of his voice, the humiliation of standing there while her dignity was trampled, and the silence of her daughter, who couldn't find the courage to speak. Each memory burned quietly in her heart, not as anger, but as a deep achy, a pain that comes from being unseen by the people you love most. She stared at her trembling hands, remembering all the years she had worked tirelessly to build this family's foundation. She had been there for every milestone, every struggle, every joy. Now, that same home felt foreign, as if she were merely an intruder in a place she once called her own. Her joints ached, her health was failing, and yet the pain in her body was nothing compared to the ache of disrespect that lingered in her chest. She had given everything, time, effort, love, only to be treated as a burden. But beneath that sorrow, something stronger began to stir resolve. She wasn't a woman driven by revenge, she was a woman who believed in lessons. Life had taught her that silence could be powerful. But sometimes, silence also had to end. Her mind began to form a plan, not one of cruelty, but of truth. She decided she would leave something behind that would remind her son-in-law of the value of empathy, the weight of his words, and the consequences of taking kindness for granted. Over the next few days, she moved carefully, deliberately, as though preparing for a quiet departure. She noticed everything, where he kept his wallet, the way he dismissed his wife's words, how he barked orders instead of asking. She watched, listened, and waited. Her daughter sensed something changing in her mother, but didn't know what it was. The older woman smiled softly whenever she was asked if everything was fine, responding only with, "Yes, my dear. Everything is as it should be." At night, she began writing a letter, a simple note written in her neat, old-fashioned handwriting. In it, she poured her heart out, not with bitterness, but with wisdom. She thanked them for the roof over her head, for the years of shared memories, and even for the pain, because it reminded her that she still had a heart that could feel. But she ended the letter with a promise, that life has a way of returning what we give, and that respect, once lost, is a debt that must eventually be repaid. When she finished writing, she folded the letter and tucked it away in a place only he would find. Her eyes softened as she looked around the room one last time. The faded family photos, the small trinkets that told stories of love long forgotten. She didn't know exactly how things would unfold, but she knew this. Her silence had protected them long enough. Now, her actions would teach what her words never could. The morning of the surprise began quietly, just like any other. The house was calm, sunlight spilling gently through the curtains, birds chirping faintly outside. Nothing about the scene hinted at what was about to happen. The mother-in-law woke early, her movements slow but deliberate. Her face carried a strange calmness, the kind that only appears when a decision has already been made. She prepared a simple breakfast, humming softly to herself, her heart heavy yet steady. Today wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, about teaching a lesson life had failed to deliver. When the son-in-law entered the kitchen, he barely acknowledged her. His eyes darted to the table, then to his phone, already lost in his own world. She greeted him with a polite smile and poured him a cup of coffee. "Good morning," she said softly. He didn't respond. He muttered something under his breath about the coffee being too cold, even though it was freshly brewed. She didn't react. She had learned by now that anger feeds arrogance. And she refused to give him that satisfaction. He sat down to eat, and that's when he noticed something odd. An envelope placed neatly beside his plate. "What's this?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. She simply replied, "It's something for you. Please read it when I'm gone." Her tone was gentle, almost serene. Confused, he shrugged and set it aside, not giving it much thought. She smiled faintly, then walked toward the door, her steps slow but purposeful. Her daughter, noticing her mother leaving with a small suitcase, rushed over. "Mom, where are you going?" she asked, panic rising in her voice. The mother-in-law touched her daughter's cheek softly and said, "Don't worry, my dear. I'm not leaving forever. I'm just giving everyone some space to think." A moment after she left, curiosity got the better of the son-in-law. He opened the envelope lazily, expecting something trivial. Inside was a neatly folded letter. As he read the first few lines, his expression shifted. It wasn't a note of anger or accusation. It was something far more powerful. The letter spoke of gratitude and pain, of the years she had spent caring for the family, of the silent sacrifices no one noticed. But as the words went on, they turned into a mirror, one that reflected his behavior back at him. She wrote of how respect can't be demanded, it must be earned, of how cruelty always returns in ways we least expect. Then came the final paragraph, short, but it hit him like a blow. "I am not pretending to be sick," she wrote, "but one day, you may find yourself in my place, weak, tired, and hoping for kindness. I pray someone will treat you better than you treated me." By the time he finished reading, his hands were trembling. The house suddenly felt colder, emptier. The mop he had once thrown at her stood quietly in the corner, like a ghost of his own guilt. In that silence, he finally understood the depth of what he had done. The real surprise wasn't her departure. It was the realization that he had lost the respect of a woman who once loved him like a son. The days following her departure felt heavier than expected. The house, once filled with tension, now echoed with a haunting stillness. The daughter moved quietly, her eyes often drifting toward her mother's empty chair, the one that used to creak gently as she sipped her evening tea. The son-in-law, who once filled the home with arrogance, now felt an unfamiliar void growing inside him. Every sound, the ticking clock, the clinking of dishes, seemed to remind him of her absence. At first, he tried to justify his actions, telling himself she was overreacting. But guilt doesn't fade when it's buried. It lingers, whispering in the quiet moments. He began to notice the small things she used to do. The laundry folded neatly, the kitchen spotless, the meals prepared with love. Now, the house seemed disorganized, colder, lacking the warmth she carried effortlessly. Each passing day made him realize that her presence had been the invisible heartbeat of their home. One evening, he found himself holding the letter again, reading it slowly, each word cutting deeper than before. For the first time, tears welled in his eyes, not from shame alone, but from the realization of how deeply he had failed as a human being. The line, "I pray someone will treat you better than you treated me," echoed in his mind like a quiet plea for redemption. When she finally returned weeks later, the first thing she saw was him waiting by the door, eyes downcast, voice trembling with apology. No words were needed. Forgiveness wasn't spoken, it was felt. He gently took her hand, and in that simple act, pride dissolved. The lesson was clear. Kindness costs nothing. Yet it holds the power to change everything. In that moment, humility replaced arrogance, and respect was finally restored.